when there's a authenticity or genuineness to a happening. It's rare that one doesn't bring a history to the occasion. But let's say after repeatedly living through the life, we then come for an understanding that there has been a yearning for something authentic or genuine. That's not so much historically part of the story because of the history and the background or whatever, but it's kind of ahistorical. It's so let's say in that yearning, we then look back at our relationships that we've had throughout time, and we see the thread running through them. And you can see how at moments when it opened up and became a possibility, and then also when in fact it lost its energy. And you can see when the thing then started to fall apart. It didn't fall apart at the time, it was falling apart all along.
Yeah.
So in retrospect, you have access to a creative process that there's something in you that somehow, if it's authentic, if there's a genuine invitation that touches you creatively, it opens up a doorway where it was hidden before. A doorway is just natural, a shared experience, where somehow people are in a similar frequency with each other in that shared experience. And then something what they're doing starts from that feeling. Okay. You see, generally, when you look historically back through the relationships, they all resemble parental relationships, this or that. They seem to have history in them or repetition. But when you look back at it also creatively, you see that there was a you that was determined to have an experience. That was experiencing this intuitive sense that it had in itself. When it put that on to someone, when it was touched by someone else, and it connected as if their lives were connected with that feeling. And that somehow you had that intuitive. And then you also saw when the energy broke or the feeling broke or the literalness of, or the feeling was lost or the trust was lost. In some cases, you see that there's an occasion where there's something called creative trust, where in falling in love, one surrenders the resistance in some way.
Yes.
But then when some occasion happens that interrupts the flow of the relationship, and independence starts to awaken again.
Right.
Uh-oh, Mary popped in twice. Who's the other one here?
Urja, maybe?
Maybe, I can't see her. Hey, how you doing, Seth? Okay, there's Kai. Do you remember Kai?
Yeah.
You remember when this guy was a little baby?
I do remember Seth Little.
He
Hi,
was a
Seth.
little baby.
Nice to see you. All grown up.
Yeah, all grown up. Well, he's also, well, I have some information for you about these games and crypto and have you been keeping the news up? Well, I lost him there. No, I had some articles that first that these people, a lot of game players were complaining that there were sellouts because they were just trying to make money. This crypto guy, this new big game that came in. And they were trying to nickel and dime you with t-shirts and stuff like
Peter
that.
Molyneux, he's a known scammer guy.
So then there was a question of this make a buck idea. And the other guys were saying, look, for the game, the crypto was genuine, opens up new fields of exploration and stuff like that. So they were saying that. Is that all baloney?
It's yet to be seen.
Well,
Most of it now is just money grab.
But then they say no, but then they say 4 billionaires, they don't want to own the rest of the world. They're creating their metaverse that no one else knows what's going on. And these guys are telling you how they're saving mankind. And you say, please don't save us, man. Just let us know what's going on.
Well, it's just a word now. Nobody's really showing anything.
Okay. So, no, but it's interesting that I stumble upon these things there as I'm looking at it, you know.
Yeah,
that quickly,
pretty quick.
It's all changing quickly also, but quickly it's also becoming organized again. It's quickly becoming organized. Now here's segue.
They're all there.
Segway's all there. Yeah. Okay. Is anyone else on with us here?
Jimmy is on YouTube. I don't know if anybody else is on YouTube. Say hi if you're here.
Okay. Okay, so it's pretty much what we were discussing there. So do you feel the flux while everything is remaining the same, it's changing?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and yet the change is becoming natural.
Mm-hmm.
The stories, let's see, I'm seeing that a lot is, for me, everything is up in the air in one sense. I'm seeing it more from the other side, looking into the story, and seeing then connections that run through it. It's really pretty remarkable. And I also see then from the perspective of everybody sharing an experience years ago of just hanging out. Basically, it didn't have a literal philosophy of telling you what to do, but in the hanging out, there was a what we would call a darshan yoga, a seeing or shedding light on. It's something that when you look at it deeply enough, it's depending on if you looked at it somewhat, it was therapeutic. If you looked at it a bit more than that, let's say if you looked at the pain in your arm or your chest or something like that, then you figured out how to move and get around it or something like that. But if you saw it was a recurrent pain or something like that and you explored it a bit deeper, not that the pain was the enemy, but the pain was the revelation.
Right.
So you see, the first move was to get rid of the pain and go back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also see that there is some element that says, let's take a look. And in taking a look, it shifts the timetable. Because then anytime you take a look, you agree in yourself to take a look. Then you're kind of agreeing that you'll go by what you find. You won't avoid it.
Yes.
So you see, okay, a large part of it, it looks like avoidance, but it may be a way of carrying on brilliantly. What I was reading about last week, the woman who discovered something that was really interesting. Before they tried to kill the cancer, she had a way where she felt that the discovery that the body was negotiating with the cancer.
Mm.
And the cancer wasn't seen as an enemy, okay, and that there was a negotiation. So she then saw cellular structure that then kind of ordered the cancer to rest, or like the body then came to some decision, like a court case or something, and told the cancer, okay, stop now. Okay. So she found that this self-healing element, or would look like self-healing, but that somehow healing didn't mean what the ego thought it meant. It was more a manager of a system that was happening creatively towards experiences. And so it seemed then, from that perspective, when there was a feeling that invited you, you went into a story without the history.
Right.
So you went into a story that had a history, but you went in from a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it was as if you were an American visiting a different culture, and they had a different vibe of how you should act and how you should be or whatever, when it was merely an attraction that you had in relationship, but then you enter into a cultural imperative and a history and stuff like that. And so to some degree you're an attraction, but to some degree there's a resistance.
Yeah.
So you see the theater of your life. And once you see it, it's been revealed as almost all of it has been theater of your life. Where that somehow there's a you that's been in the story, but not of it. And you perceive that there is a thread that runs through the life. that somehow, and runs through each individual to some degree, but it's there when a person becomes aware something happens, it's released. And then it becomes a conscious journey. But that there is an energy that runs through the system. There's you, the literal you, the history. But then there's a kind of before you, the literal you. That's kind of a mystery that also runs through the life. And so there are moments that the history is almost the driver of the story, but there's an experience waiting. And the mystery is having a conversation with the outer world through the person's movements in life. And I feel from that perspective that if you see it, then you see how important experience is to the energy or to the being. That there is certain deep experiencing hidden in everyday life.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Mm-hmm.
And that, and so then you see not only everyday life as it's carrying on, you also see a deep thread running through everyday life. And that there are moments when it discovers itself, but it has an outer framework that it plays out according to identity and history and background and so on. And these are driving forces. But it also has a moment with its own existence, with its own being. And that was called death in some cases, but death is a literalness of the story. I think that it's hidden in a story where even as a dopey broken heart, a lost love, or this or that, is closer to the death that I've experienced than the literal death of the body. That there was a dying or death while you were alive.
Yeah.
And the death while you were alive was a kind of precursor to the actual experience where you saw something that couldn't be seen, and the broken heart was the medium. And you see how the forces drove itself to have that experience out of nothing.
Why? Why?
Because somehow the life included the whole experience. You saw the death experience was not literally the death of the body. The death experience was inherently in the existence. Become aware of the natural process of living. And you then become aware of the being that you've studied, that you've done mantras with, that you hope to find. You become aware that that elemental expression exists in you, and that it's assumed a life. That there has been a quest, and that quest is cannot be satisfied with the accommodations that it makes to survive.
Yeah.
So it makes the agreements in the life, and it's true to them. But its deeper truth to it all is that it won't lie. It has there is a conversation going on that you've tried to capture through Shanti, through this, through the philosophy or whatever, but there is a conversation going on with the mystery. And the mystery doesn't have a history attached to it, but it kind of has you completing. Gee, I'm flying with it. So please, it's not a question of logical knowledge I'm reading from. I'm taking intuition myself and shedding light on something.
Where does love fit into that, Danny? What is love in that equation?
Okay, so then you see that love as the surrender of the self. You see it happening already when it cares for something. And sometimes it's absurd in its care to others, but because it almost has to give up everything in order to provide for another or something. So you see that I and thou conversation happening. that I and thou conversation in my mind's eye is happening all the time. So accidental meetings, this or that, it escapes the mind's planning.
Yeah.
The mind may plan a nice meal or something like that. But the process somehow, so then you enter into a phase where you're attempting, since you have assumed the identity of survival so long and you're in a structure, but you also understand that inside of you, you've had a conversation throughout your life, and then you've met individuals who've shed certain light on that conversation that's happening internally. And as the light is shed on that eternally, that becomes more of your expression in life. And it's not even so much related to talent or history or background or something, but somehow you can assume some characteristics of expression that's necessary. So in that, you start then to see the, not only, you don't lose the logic of the survival sense in the social fabric, but you also understand that the human life is a creative act that's free. And so when in fact you are true to the form that you're in, it's because there is something that touches you in the form that allows you to be there. So you see, you have a relationship with that feeling, and then you have a literal relationship. When that feeling goes and it literalizes, there's a hurt that runs through the story. That we just saw, where I thought that some of the relationships that we had seen were like the daughter-mother relationship had come to some grace then, and they wished each other well in the same neighborhood or whatever, and looked out for each other simply. But then a stumbling block may happen where you see a hurt going back all those years that is modified and literalized, and that became like a chess game in the circumstance. That so you see, so what seemed like a simple perceptive sense of release of the story, or hey mommy, how you doing? Something as simple as that, hey baby, but not to minimize it, but to recognize the basic components, that it's one person. Hey baby is one person. Hey mommy is one person. You understand, in two parts and different expressions. So there is a recognition of that, and the recognition of that is carried. It's not literalized per se. But then from the perspective of creativity, you see that the hurt was a creative factor. And it ran through time. It could last 50, 30 years, another lifetime of pattern. And yet it seemed to me that what you discover again and again and again, that it's missing a heartfelt conversation. And that all life is missing a heartfelt conversation. And I say, why? I say, because with the heartfelt conversation, you couldn't kill, you couldn't manipulate, you couldn't scheme, you couldn't, because the other is not the other. You feel for them.
Right.
You see, and that's the premise of caring for a larger population, is that somehow you have a heartfelt and relationship, and it's a shared space like that. Okay. That's the premise. The literal reality of it is manipulation, structure, all these other things, but you see the underlying premise that runs through it. There's a common denominator, and that the individual is also representing a collective whole in some way. That there is so it's not that one is tempering the movements, but again, it's what would the angel's relationship be to the population that it's flying over? So if it assumes an identity, the angel will say, with no past or no history, but just the excitement to experience what it means to be a person, somehow naively enters into the body just from the joy of being alive, or to experience what it is. So even the bad things, the good things, that would all register to them as experiences. Okay. How naive. And yet I think a child has that space for a moment in time where they experience all of it, the highs, the lows, the hurts, the happiness of it.
Mm.
But let's say from non-historical premise, I think there is a point when you return to the story from that you see that you have been caring for something in yourself and in your surrounding. And we'll call it again darshan yoga. I'll call it more than, and why I say because in shedding light on something, by being with it deeply enough, by having a love waiting out there in the mystery while you're in the history taking care of something and having a conversation with it while this is, and others knowing it, and it's a theater that you've created and it's normal. And you've got this most remarkable theater going in Pennsylvania there, and I'm looking at it. And you the guy across the street won't let you go on the property. So and I'm seeing this amazing theater that you're in, and how some are resisting you, and some have a deep affection and love for you, and they don't know what to do with it, and because doing isn't the question. But somehow, no matter how tough people try to be, there's still a feeling shared with you that won't let them be too vulgar or too this or too that. So I feel that you have a medium, and that what you are leaving is also memories. And not literally memories like this, but more memories where you'll laugh your ass off. That it could have been so easy. You understand? And Danny was begging you, could have been so easy. And you see how everyone just resisted it being that, and they were going to do their thing. Everyone was going to do their damn thing. And that you would have to watch them talk shit, talk this, talk that, blah, blah, blah. Until there would be possibly just, I think to some degree, our interaction with each other allowed a space in the circumstance where the circumstance then had to be civilized.
It's
Because
getting much sweeter too.
well, it's because it is a sweet, look, our premise is that there is a demand that it be human, that we did this thing, we created this thing. And I think that most of us are in such a situation like that. And so, but you also see when the hurt comes into the story. And what is the hurt? It can't be captured. But the hurt runs through the story as a possessive. Now it has a meeting with itself. And I say, I mean, can you see that when the experience is there, when in fact it has been violated or broken or whatever, that even though the person may be still parallel living, they're not existing in the same way until some accident happens or in your memory. So you see parallel lives being lived all the time by you that are realized at moments, but are happening. And that your consciousness, your mind, your immune system, they're all moderating this. And when you meet it, you usually meet it when it's in trouble, you try to fix it. But beyond the fixing it, you meet it. And you meet a multi-dimensional you. While you're living an everyday life, you see the everyday is also a multi-dimensional expression. And it's having dialogue that is taken for normal. Now, there's manifestations of the dialogue on screens now where we didn't have that before, where you can see that what I would have thought before my imagination or something and had a conversation. I don't know if the past hundreds of years ago had the same intensity as we have now in communication. How did you communicate to someone 1,000 miles away or
Yes.
different language or whatever? And yet somehow that was an era communicated through the senses, through the feelings, through the shared, that was very much just like a radio or a telephone or something like that. And then if you read this woman, Mintz, who died, Beatrice Mintz, at 100 years old the other day, she was the one who discovered a conversation of the cells to the cancer.
Mm.
And that it wasn't necessarily a fight or a war, but that somehow she saw some possibilities that the drugs were doing more damage because they were knocking out that system
Yeah.
that was more of a cooperative with itself in some way, that you can say that they had something so dumb as we kid around saying that you can say to the cancer, okay, look, let me have a couple more years to get around. There's a few, and it's not so dumb. Even though it sounds dumb that way, as if you would have the conversation, something like that is happening. If something is interesting to you or vital, it does seem that parallel time is not, it's not so dominated by continuing time as a literal future. Its future is more a kind of creative future. That that it sees then the body as very much more creative act. So then the body's elements are not a foreign object, but in fact, they are part of an experience that's happening. And from that premise, you can talk to the body not as a stranger, but the same way that you get your body to get on a plane to fly to Europe or something like that. Without realizing it, you've just convinced your body to do this very difficult thing, is to get to the airport, to get on a plane, to change your time, to change your schedule. And you've picked up your body and put it on a plane. How did you convince the body to do that? Is that once you decided to do it, the body went along with it, and or it resisted. And then you can start to say, holy shit, and now I can see when it goes along with what I'm about, and when I also don't know, and it doesn't know either. So it's my companion in some way. If I don't know, but if it's sending signals to me, no, mommy, come on, you know, or something like that. So then if you see in your body that you're caring for something, but you also, this time you can't lie.
No.
And lying means what? That you see the living and dying process happening in yourself. And whatever horror shows it would have in the story, that's beside the point. You see a creative process and running through your life all this time while you were a normal person with a name and a number and this and that. You also had an energy running through that you tapped at times. So you may have located that energy by accident, by love affairs, by studies, by yoga, by this or that. But that was not the energy. That was a kind of ray of the energy, an aspect of the energy that was running through the store. But then you see that locating an element of that gave you then somewhat of a creative life. Because as you started to explore your own life, you started to find out people who were also in similar situations.
Mm-hmm.
Where it was normal for them to try to look that they had tried, they were hurt or this or that, but some elements, but there was a struggle about living, not only around survival, not only because they were disturbed because something real happened. And the disturbance was not only an imbalance, disturbance was indicative of an absence of something deep happening in them. And so the premise that one lived to survive, one lived to make a profit, one lived to do this, the self always being a dominant figure, left the self then without the feeling of mercy, unless it saw another that it can incorporate into the story. But it was at the surrender of the self that something got past the literal continuity, interrupted it, where there was a soulful reflection. I'm feeling that the relationship that comes out of that the absence of it has more intelligence than a false presence. that you have to deal with again, literally or psychologically, and be incorporated into the story. So basically, how are you doing, Urja?
I'm all right. I was just talking to Lara about her coming.
Yeah, look, so then you become aware that it's a creative act. Okay.
Yes.
And it's also kind of required. And so when the people become aware that, look, hey, look, you're acting like it's normal. I may be dying. You are going through a form of dying that I have gone through a few times. What a hard conversation of mother and daughter. But it's not a conversation. It's so much as all of a sudden your eyes meet and there's no trip. You kind of know you're looking out for each other.
Yes.
And the looking out for each other is not each other as much as one, you're experiencing the feeling to some extent. The experience you think is missing is still inherently, I think, in the body before it was born and as it was born, and the process that it went through being born. The literalization of the feeling into a process where the body then cooperates, and somehow the body awakens and it knows what it has to do. And somehow the people around you also become psychologically aware of something, and even if they were, somehow there is an agreement. And it's normalized that somehow the body starts to cooperate, even though it may think differently and want to do something else, or somehow this is happening. So there are processes, there are experiences that are happening that are remarkable, that are not only owned by science or art or whatever, but when one perceives the life one has lived, and then sees one as a player in the story, you have a perception of something that can only come when you are no longer attached literally to the story through identity, and you get a glimpse of your life as a creative process. And then once that was the attempt. I thought that you were close, you had conveyed a kind of closeness with that, as I felt that Jai had, because they were, that the hurt allowed for a honest conversation, and that it wasn't honest conversation. It doesn't even have to converse that way, but it's the ease with which bodies touch each other, or lay against the couch watching a Netflix show or some stupid thing like that. They're not entirely stupid. They're kind of a surrender for a moment of the ownership of the body. Okay. So the question, my feeling for you is that when this is happening, it's kind of important that there's no trip point. You understand? If you say, look, if I say a segue, it would be nice to see you there for a couple of days. And they say, why only a couple of days? I say, because after a couple of days, it literalizes into a situation. But in the feeling, let's see what we share in the feeling, and then we'll see what kind of format it takes.
Yeah.
So somehow there's a need for us to have a plan literalized before the meeting. Let the meeting have an agreeable plan that comes out of a mutually creative process. You know what I mean? What do you say? It's very hard to get there like that.
Yeah.
So then you see in retrospect, you see in a meeting that sometimes something can be very challenging if a couple of you have to care for your community, and care for your family in that situation. And care means if you see forces that are overlapping, then you may try to create a theater of an honest conversation.
And Danny, when I spoke to Jen, I think I discovered a side of her that I had not seen before, because she has a persona that's so American, the cap on and let's do things. But underneath it, there is that incredible caring being for the community. With her, and I feel excited maybe to start to be meeting more, like around having meals and sharing. I see something possible that I didn't see before.
Well, that style, though, is called gee whiz or golly in America, right? I think they call it golly or gee whiz. And so it's always perky,
Yes.
and bouncing and getting around, even though its ass may hurt, its neck may hurt, its back may hurt, but it has a perky quality to it.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I think but you also know that somehow the person has had an illness or pain throughout their life that's been pretty heavy.
Yes.
She's caring for others who have that kind of pain. And I think that seems to be naturally for her there. Mhm. And so, but at the same time, there's also a very private life around those pains and a story around managing look how many hundreds of people that were cared for, how many orphans, how many this, how many that, how many. So they took up an energy or an expression in the story from all of us years ago. As did Reed, as did, when Jenny and I left Santa Rosa, then the people who were there, the doctor had passed away. And so the people did their thing, left, created things for themselves or stayed there and sold it off. And so they've all come out of that experience and then re-entered the story. What do you say, Derek?
About what specifically?
Well, let's say somehow in meeting John and then, so then I've also assumed a certain stance with all of you who came out of the situation with John, even though there were also 100 other circumstances around us that didn't meet each other or browsed past each other or walked past each other, but had. Okay. So somehow a passing of John then reconnects, resolves something for you where you can become a spokesperson for something. And that invites a Reed then to enter the story from 40 years of not seeing him into a literal role and expression. And then you introduce Reed then to, what's his name? Your main man, what's his name again? Elliot. Am I in that story?
Yeah, I think all the way throughout, it would seem.
Am I in the Elliot story with you? Wouldn't I walk around and say, what the hell am I doing? Wouldn't I say, what the hell am I doing here? Because I would be trying to reach Elliot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I say, well, why? I say, because, we've created what is an influencer to a degree. And you also enter into a phase where there's a genuineness now, no trip. Meaning that your motives are no longer the motives of survival and continuity in the same way where your survival was so important that you had to repress others or trip others or kill them or kill their expression or something like that in order. So let's say you enter into a phase where competition is no longer, it may be a joke, but it's no longer is really part of you. And so then the very,
Is there a healthy
so then I
competition?
say, what happens to me? What was that you
Is
said?
there I think I may have a delay in my audio, but is there a healthy competition in there? A room for healthy competition at all, or is it just
A competition with whom?
I don't know. Amongst peers in work that you produce, not to destroy another, but to elevate.
No, it doesn't matter. The theater is still the theater. There's still an unfolding taking place, presence or an absence. So whatever was shared in the theater, it depends on what the motive is. So how did it come to be competition? Unless you uncovered that there is a competition. So
No,
let's say
no.
what you've uncovered. So what you've uncovered is something else. So if you've uncovered then in the situation that there is a competition that exists, competition about what?
The self, it would seem, or their motivations or desires.
So then, if it includes me, which you are doing, then I would like to know if I'm included. How about letting me know that I'm included without me being included all the way? And I say, why? Because there may be some challenging situations that I may have creatively. I feel at this point in time I'm hanging out because something speaks to me. You understand? But I also see whether should I hang out for Jai's issue in the body as I'm dying in my own expression? Should I not ask, then what you want from me, I want from you?
Yeah.
So what competition would you like to create? I'm here for it. Come on, whip it out, mother jumper.
No,
What do you
maybe
mean
I
no?
just don't.
So then I say, then if the motive is that there's something because I think so. What's the competition? I don't have any fight with anything.
No, that's not what I mean by competition. I guess
I
I get
do
in.
have a fight if I'm being incorporated into a story, which is kind of, how do you understand? Which is not at this point in time including the energy. What does that mean?
That is a good question.
I say, if in fact there's something you'd like to explore with Elliot, and you and Joan would like to explore with Elliot and Bitcoin and all of that, I'll catch you later, possibly, if I'm still in the body. But that doesn't speak to me that strongly. And I say, what? And I say, because I see everyone has their thing, but if it includes me, I like it to come from a certain place.
Yeah,
That we're
I think
agreeing to
that's.
do this thing and to explore it. But at the same time, I don't mind. Hello, I do mind if I'm literally included in your experimentation.
And I guess I don't see where that has happened. Really.
I think then when you introduce Reed, then you're expanding the scope, and then Reed says that Tom, Mary was a, so then brings into the story. So it's interesting for me. Also, if anyone then tells a story, as we were talking with Jai and her daughter, am I going to be coming back into this story after all these years and this energy and this and that? I can't doubt that the person's situation is real. But then I also say, you and Joan ain't no slouches. You've been able to create an expression for yourself out of the energy as she had, and navigate through the form and navigate through some heavy personalities.
Yeah.
And yet, so that seems to be okay, isn't it? And so then, what would you like? Then to me, then survival isn't only the medium. The medium is also a creative one. And I think that to some degree, when there was a getting together, that it became to the hanging out with each other, the folks here and there, it became a normalcy. We can kid around with segue, this and that. But to me, a process was happening. And the process was one that resembles the very thing that you're trying to get with the acid. And I say, why? I say, because it has to happen through an immersive, because one inherently is avoiding it. One's continuity incorporates what it wants to survive. But there's a moment when it does see that it's in a creative act. And so there is a responsibility that's different to a creative act, that it be genuine. And so I do feel that the next phase of what we've been sharing, that my interest is in the kind of genuineness of the experience. So I don't see you as a poor thing who needs a trip.
Yeah, neither do I. I don't see it that way at all.
And I don't see Joan as a poor thing that, oh, man, my mother did this to me, right? I think that if that's the case, then let me out of the story. Not because it's bad or good, but because other things are happening to me, like Urja's neck hurting. That's more important to me happening. If you don't need me hanging around, let me take care of this neck. Basically, if there's an honest conversation that you'd like to have, where they all get on and we have share an honest conversation about where we are and what we're about after all these years. If that's what you're doing, I don't know if that's what you're doing. What you're doing is seemingly wanting to awaken your consciousness to some end. But then I don't know that the people delivering it have similar challenges that you have. So that's generally what you found out with the shamans. When you got in with the shamans and started to get techniques with them, you started to find out that the challenges you had in life, they also had. That you had a problem with a girlfriend, they also seemed to have a problem with a girlfriend, even though they knew about everything else, what God wanted, what Jesus said, what Buddha wanted. But then a dopey little girlfriend thing seemed to throw them. Does that sound familiar there, Derek?
Yep.
So you could even see with a Jesus or a Buddha, a dopey girlfriend thing. What looks like a dopey girlfriend thing is not actually a dopey girlfriend thing. It is an energy field. And it comes close to some elements of the life force itself. So the question for me is, going into a story that I don't know, that I'm not particularly invited in. And I say, why? I say, because it's missing an honest conversation, but it has other motives. What happens? I'm talking about my interest in the formative, but you kind of have to be free to explore any avenue. But you say competition, what do you mean in competition? Is there a competition?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I don't know. If somebody makes a nice piece of music, I kind of want to do well and make a nice piece of music. You know, not necessarily for any other reason than to do so, but it's also part of what I do or like to do.
But let's say that you examine that premise, not presume it. So let's say that if you look back in your lifetime, before we've met and talked, and then after we've talked and explored in these years, can you see the moves that you've made throughout the life?
Yeah.
Now, are the moves innocent, nice, good guy, this or that? What name would you give to it? That person just keeping it together or doing their thing? And then when you also saw with yourself and John that time when it exploded, now in retrospect, can you see the moves? And can you see that no matter what I tried with any of it, I couldn't talk the people out of their literalness or their possessiveness of the story or the hurt? And they were hurt about what? Who said this? Who did that? Right? And yet it was such a profound hurt that no matter how much I would try to create some face to allow there to be an honest conversation, even going, how impossible? Why? Can you see how stubborn it is? Do you see how attached it is? Now, what are you going to presume about something that can be so attached or so stubborn that it can last for years in pain and hurt and define its life that way? And that's what the relationship is, that memory of that moment. And that's, you understand? What is that experience?
I don't know how to
And then
answer
all of a
that.
sudden it shifts and it's seen as what? So how did it go? A perception of, it's not even a literal perception that you sat on a rock and you saw something. You were called upon to talk to the sister. You were called upon to be a medium. And being a medium, you saw the story a bit differently. But we had to have our own framework to shed the light on what have been just a common event of a person sick, dying, the same argument with family. It was all baloney. And yet somehow our interaction with it gave it another dimension. What is that?
Self-preservation, it sounds like.
What do you mean? That Gary had to be there for something, to see something, to make a
Oh, I see.
decision about living or dying?
No, I mean, that
As you
sounds
were
like grace to me.
with someone that you've had big fights with, huge fights with, and with Joan, and then all of a sudden, and yeah, it was a major guy in what you're doing and connecting us. And then he passes away, and then you assume a role of talking to his family as if you were number one man and sweetheart, and you loved each other deeply. When I couldn't trick any of you into even talking 5 minutes with each other, even on the screen, you wouldn't want the picture to be next to each other.
It's funny,
You're
I
even
feel like I
aware of
made
that.
every attempt. Many
Attempting what we're
attempts.
talking about.
Yeah.
You have to see that the attempt is only an attempt because something else is happening. The naturalist doesn't have to make an attempt. You didn't have to make an attempt when the death took place. So attempt is part of the literal story.
Mm,
It's self-preserving.
mm,
Because in the social premise, attempt means that you've done your job. But if you see the move, what is the move? In the friendship, when there is self-preservation that dominates the form, it sends a hurt. Because inherently in the friendship, there's an I and thou. So somehow when you discover a whole separate element, it sends a thread running through it. Now, what you just said to me, competition, yeah. That's what you did with John? Didn't you try to create a competitive element? So is
There
that,
may have been
but
some
at this age, I
competitive.
don't know that I want to hang around unless you tell me how competitive it may be created. Maybe I'll give it a shot. You want me to dress like, you want me to be gay and go into the story with Elliot? Was that what you're thinking about? That we have a gay relationship?
No.
You're not suggesting something like that we be spiritually gay? Okay. Then what would you suggest?
I don't have any suggestions around it.
Okay.
Right. It seems like my suggestions would be irrelevant.
So
Seems
suppose
all-
suppose I would say, as I'm saying with a few folks who are coming close to dying and living and stuff like that, that if there's a next phase of the relationship, it's because there's no trip. You're not poor thing and you're not this and that. What you want from me, I also want from you, that we putting something or creating something in the interaction. And if we're creating something in the interaction, then there's no trip. If you see something creatively that you like to introduce Elliot to, but that you need help from Elliot, I'll catch you later.
Yeah, I
But
don't
that
see
you're
that.
introducing Elliot to something that he'll find tough, that Elliot will find it tough to join a conversation or to explore something with us.
Yeah.
But that you need help. If you need help, I'll see you when you get the help.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't need any help.
Because I feel that we're creating a medium, but I don't want to deny that help. But I do want to say that I think that the premise of all of you is spiritual, that you're inviting people into seeing something, not being organized into a story. That somehow, and that there is a, hey, come on, Elliot, stop it, man. Fulfill what you're doing. So I resist the premise that you and Joan need help.
Me too.
And that but that ain't what you're doing, and that the premise is that he's helping. I say that if you've gone in there may be an affection for something, but that you're inviting him to an honest conversation. And that the underpinnings at this stage of the exploration, this stage of the treatment, is no trip, no psychological trip. You don't need to see more or get stoned more to see anything deeper. You understand it. This phase is more of a genuine phase, and I'm not talking morality in the terms of logic like that. I'm talking about the morality that comes with creating something, where you're true to something. So what we share was his journey. I think when that it's usually perceived only in the dying. Until it's seen as a shared space, it usually seems like a competitive space. So you enlisting me in a competitive structure, which has a kind of joke element to me.
Yeah, that would to me also. It feels. I mean, that you say all that, and it sounds like news to me, and it's like I wonder, am I
No, you
operating with
see your
ulterior motives that
nature.
I'm
You
not
see
aware
your
of? Or?
nature also. Okay, hold on. So somehow, I say, from my perspective, that between all of us, this stage of the expression comes from no trip. It's purely around the energy in some way, and that conversations then that we're having with those who are close to us. Our conversations not psychologically to do this and that, but are shared experiences. Just as if you're talking to yourself, there is now an intimacy. And you see the underpinnings of the circumstances that people have a broken heart, they pursued something, they took a chance with something, and that broken heart is a healthy thing. But getting rid of it artificially is not such a healthy thing. The broken heart is a sign of an intelligence that you share with the other. And so then you see that what they go into in the next phase would be more honest. That their life is no longer a psychological quest, but they realize that their life now is a journey towards a real thing, a genuine experience. And it's usually, so that's why dying is revealed, because you see the genuine experience is soulful. It's not made for the reasons, the literal reasons in the world. So I would say that there may be some conversations that the three of you have with each other that may be illuminating for you. But if it's illuminating for me without me, okay, I don't mind that. But I do mind, I have nothing to compete with anyone about. I have no way how people should live or what they should do. But if I'm brought into it deeply, and I say why? Because somehow creatively between us, I have kind of vowed to be there for how the story unfolds. But if that turns out to be stupid or a joke, I don't mind being free of that responsibility because they're a heavy hitter. There's something like that with Elliot. At the same time, logically, it's not there. That I would be there for that. There's a moment waiting in time. But if that's bullshit to the person, I don't mind that being freed from that story, because I am hanging out, because I see that the relationships, all of these relationships have been an artwork, that there's a truer element than the literal story, that there's a falling in love with different dimensions of the experience that one is true to. So I feel that there may be moments when you need to try something or do some ritual to bring about something about in yourself. Just as in the music or something like that, something you need to see to get around the curve. But when the situation is literalized, I can say, give it a shot if you like, but can I be excused? I say, why? Because it's your call. The next stage, I feel, in a relationship is voluntary because the person wishes that. What do you think?
Yeah, that all makes sense.
Well, it's a shared space. There's a shared space. And if I'm the wrong person at that point in time, okay, I'm sorry to fail the story. So I hope it doesn't. How does it seem then to you when you say, is there healthy competition?
Oh, yeah, I mean, in creativity and things, but yeah, I don't
There
mean
is.
competitive.
If in fact that's agreed that that's what it is, in fact that a person may be able then to drive the process a bit further. But when you come to this point for me, it's because the person is voluntarily wanting to explore something, no longer hiding something. So in the premise, I say, well, what is the hiding? Is that the vulnerability is hidden by the structure, and yet I see the vulnerability to be the main form. The so-called evolved person is secondary to me. I see the vulnerability to be a kind of beauty. And I see that life is missing, and what's missing between us is an honest conversation. Purely around the energy. There's no other relationship. And if the energy is missing, then the form is, I'll catch it. I have no fight with it, but I have no relationship to it either. I have relationship to the mystery that it represented. But I don't buy the premise that of the therapeutic self, that it's a poor thing that needs to be treated. I think that everybody here has been pretty much exposed to some depth of their life and some sense of what they've created and some experience. So if there is a desire for a conversation, that's fine about what's happening where we are in life. But if that ain't, what do you think? Is that okay with you?
Open to the conversation, that seems to be why I'm here. So, I kind of follow that thread over most of it, I think, pretty much all of it, if I survey the situation.
What's the situation?
Life, my own story that I exist in. I feel like there's a tug in the direction of this honest conversation, not a specific or honest conversation, but the honesty of that journey, maybe is a good way to put it.
Well, it's challenging because there was a premise already between all of us that there was a kind of inherent teaching in what you were doing. It wasn't spelled out, but that somehow you were earning a living that way. Somehow it was coming that way. Somehow, in what would have been a difficult situation, you found a civilized way to live in a situation. And it didn't lay it out, spelled out as to this or that, but it was around teaching or caring or stuff like that, or sharing. And so somehow what would have been a literal situation that would have been very difficult of survival, you found still a way of keeping it civilized and navigating in a situation. So the normalcy of it was important to me, seeing the normalcy of it all, and then seeing the normalcy of people connecting with others and then coming into the situation. So I felt that the very unfolding of situations, the accidents and the situations like that is a creative process that's happening between us. But I also feel, from my perspective, that it's no longer that somehow the trips that allowed us to survive in some way are now the trips that deny an intelligent life, an intelligent expression, because it makes a possessive of survival out of the thing, when in fact the survival is only an aspect of a creative life. And that's what the dialogues were all between in relationships. They normalized, but they normalized the way a movie normalized, where the people then, even though it's a creative act between them, it normalized into a relationship or to an expression. So you found out its dimensions if you missed it or something was lost or this happened, you started to see the dynamic that you were in. I felt that in my some sense of being there for Elliot because I saw a deep trouble in him, and that I would be there for that moment. What a dumb idea. And that there would be one true moment. Not an evasive thing, not a trip, not a schemer, not a this, not a planner, but one was true to their own expression. Schmuck number 8. Can I be free from that dumb story? You know that ain't gonna happen, right?
I'd be surprised if.
And you're gonna create a competitive situation. Thanks a lot. This old
I don't know.
is gonna go compete with you. Thanks very much. Thanks for the favor. I'm looking for my own schmucky idea that there's an awakening waiting. And you said there's an awakening waiting for you, Danny. Bafangu.
I don't see the competition in that interaction with.
The other one who
Elliot,
introduced
you know,
competition. I say I only represent one thing. If you're
I guess
interested in seeing something, I'll try to be there for you. But if you want to contest it or fight, I may do that just to reveal something, but I don't feel obliged any longer to do that. Or if I'm the wrong schmuck, I don't mind being the wrong schmuck if it frees me from having to hang around. But if in fact there is still an honest conversation to happen, then I'd like you to probably maybe recommend something like that. And maybe if that's to happen, sure, one will hang for that. But if that's not to happen, I have no fight with the story. But the characters that you're bringing into it are not slouches. You know what I mean by that? Everyone that's coming into the story is strong-minded dudes.
I see. So there's like all of a sudden in the meeting, there's a future event set up between.
I don't have it. You have
forces. No, I know, but you say with like Reed and bringing Reed into the picture.
No, Reed is a good-hearted soul. You can see immediately coming in there. But he's also putting a story together, in his own mind's eye, in a situation that I'm caring for with him. He was there early on, and saw a lot unfold and so on. So he's navigating through the story. So I feel that there is a niceness or goodness in Reed that's that if he finds himself scheming, he falls apart or it collapses because. So I do feel he's a good-hearted person and friend has always been. So he's dear to me. But then in the history of things, that's something else. So I feel that our lives have overlapped in such a way that there is a hanging out for something, that there is a moment of kind of even in loss or even in passing away, there's an aha moment of seeing something that was kind of hidden in plain sight. What do you say? But I can't say that it's wrong for you, but let's say you go back to you and John and you say, okay, what was the move? And you were also making a move against his authority, and he saw you making a move against his authority in a situation, no?
But not personally for myself. That was for
For Jesus.
philosophically. I think it wasn't really, at the individual level, even though
Then that
obviously it would
philosophically
benefit
said,
me.
look, so then that philosophical guy said, look, John, this is what I'm doing. I'm not really doing this because of you or me or this or that. I'm doing this because something is creatively happening. You had that conversation, I mean. Right.
Oh no, yeah, that never
I
happened.
think you would
We
have been
never got
shot.
there.
You would have been shot in the leg. So let's say it's a creative act when it's perceived as a creative act. In retrospect, it is an act between two people who are very different having a challenge. And part of the challenge is true, that there's a break of feeling or something between them, and then an issue forms around it. And so maybe it's been a shared moment, then becomes a moment that is pressured and dominated, and so somehow it's a different thing. There was an article in the New York Times today about the king of clowns and how he puts you down all the time while he's teaching you. And he's the favorite of most of the master comedians and clowns in the world. But there are some that find him too heavy. He'll just, he says, maybe a short person like you can be a clown. He'll go on like that, so he'll let you know, he'll put you down while he's considering it in a funny way like that. And it was in today's New York Times there. So it was the art section. He was getting an award or something, a French guy. So what do you say then? Let's say that we illuminate our whole experience now, so that it doesn't need too much juggling or whatever, but that you're free to explore or to express yourself or whatever, but there's a shared feeling. And that shared feeling was just shared here in the house, that we shared a moment together. We made it, suppose you're on the, so that's all a shared feeling. Did you have that shared feeling?
Between me and John?
No, when you were here.
Oh, yeah.
And when
Although,
everyone seemed to be here, it was just osmosis, just hanging out with each other. And there was a shared feeling, shared knowledge in situations like that. As if people knew each other for so many years and such a long time and this and that, when in fact they were meeting each other personally. Okay. So I felt that is not this, but something has happened through an immersive. And so that some of the conversations that happen between people, even though they're everyday conversation, they're also around the art of the life, the art of the circumstance. And that somehow it's voluntary. And that happens, that somehow the exploration is like a relationship then. It is there because it wishes to be. Let me drink this one minute. We're having a circumstance where it is no longer dominated by karma, but that where we are is because creatively is where we are. That process is happening there. And I feel that when you then enter into relationship with others, you're bringing a part of that energy with you.
yeah.
So then the means of exploration is not only controlled by the psyche, that one is trying to get rid of a psychological. There's a difference then in the motive of the psyche creating a structure and the desire to explore. I say the basis of you all exploring together requires an honest conversation from the get-go, not working towards it, from my perspective. Do you know what I mean?
I think so.
Because I feel that your exploration is not therapeutic. Your exploration is then creative. And so when you're sharing that, you'd like everyone to somehow be on board with each other. That it's no longer that you're a poor thing trying to work things out with your mother at this point, but that you release your mother from this cage of ownership. Thanked her for her presence and friendship, and somehow your eye has perceived that, and that your exploration is legitimate exploration about something, not so much driven by a psychologically hurt person. But if it is, it should be recognized. What do you think?
Yeah.
So I feel if it's coming from a mutually creative act, then that means there's no trip, meaning that the history doesn't come into the exploration.
Even though that's seems impossible. Even if
Why?
you introduce two people, or just with one person, it seems nigh impossible, and then you introduce two people, and it's like it seems like an exponential karmic interaction.
I think that basically, would you say that you and Joan relationship is karmic?
I feel like I had both dharmic and karmic elements to it.
And what was
it
the
was still-
philosophy? What was the philosophy you employed to carry off such a strange thing or challenging thing?
What the
Some mantra? Did you have some mantra, or did you have some
who the why that
some
was the
religion?
mantra.
So basically, you've normalized something that could be pretty weird. Just like all of our lives could be pretty weird. This could be very weird seeing with dogs and this and that. But there's somehow a normalcy to it. And what is the normalcy? Is that there seems to be a genuine feeling that runs through the story, that you then pour the reality of the structure onto that genuine feeling. And somehow the genuineness of the feeling allows a form to carry on. And if the genuineness of the feeling shifts, then the form starts to shift. Then I say, why? Because one may have, then there's a need for survival, but still one has a need for true love in some way going through the story. So it conflicts. So somehow in one's life, one has awakened a dialogue with an energy in the world, in the life. And there's authenticity to feeling. When there's an authenticity to your feeling, it creates a reality. If the feeling shifts, the structure starts to shift. That somehow something as unknown as feelings create what we call realities in the world. And then those realities shift when they literalize, because that feeling is not literal. It's kind of true. So then the continuity is not so much based on a truth, the feeling is. So you step into a story where, okay, now we're literally happening. You see a creative process is happening while a literal process is happening. And so people may pray and become religious in order to have some contact with some other feeling than just having a job or having a meaningless life. They may then look to have a feeling that gives them a meaning in life, or a hope or a scheme or a dream. You see the dialogue, that as the life literalizes, it becomes meaningless. So hope, a scheme, a dream for love, or some mysterious force gives it another dimension to yearn for, to hope for. I feel that what I yearn for, what you yearn for, the thing that brings us together is a similar thread that runs in your relationship. So I feel then if you meet Reed or you meet Elliot and then you introduce these two forces together again, and then I feel that yearning runs through the story. And so what they're discussing is not the literal conversations that go on in the world, but the conversation of the journey. So in the competitive zone, I may say, I'll probably surrender. Doesn't sound that What do you think?
Yeah, I think so would I.
Why?
If it was really competitive, it's not worth it. It's not worth anything.
Look, at one point, John hurt you so badly and you were acting so hurt badly that I almost had to lose the relationship with John to keep some substance, to force him to be human with you. So it wasn't being offered. In fact, it was explained to me to be human was stupid. All of the people were explaining to me how stupid it was to be a human being. You understand? No matter what mantra you had or whatever, everyone was going to stick to their guns, wasn't it?
Yep.
And then when you look at it in retrospect, what was the guns you were sticking to? A hurt ran through the story. And when you take away the story, you see the hurt was pretty similar. You see a yearning that existed in John existed in you also, and that was part of the relationship, even though they were very different people. And then you see in retrospect the yearning in John, the loneliness, the longing. It wasn't just sleep problems or this or that, but you see throughout the hurt that ran through the story. Had issues with fathers and past and this, but it was a hurt. And if there was an attraction to it, John, it was her kind of caring for that hurt. So what seemed like a simple argument between you was monumental and threw everything up in the air. And I had to then go around and each of the resistant people, they were all strong, even created a church around the resistant. One little conversation. So you see how strong-minded the dudes are.
Yeah.
And what was the big issue? Well, my mother said your uncle did this. I don't want to minimize the issue because it was, but you couldn't trick these characters into an experience unless it was genuine. Even though Danny begged you, even though Danny begged him. So how does the story look from looking in outside? Where just, and then Joan had to run from one to the other to look at this one. Like an ambulance service. So getting an Uber job was probably the right thing to do since it was an Uber situation. So let's say you believe that you went through that experience. I'm not talking as a fault. I'm saying, can you see how committed it was to a hurt?
Yep.
So logic was not the medium. And no matter what was reflected, you see there was a determination towards that experience.
Seems like a combination between avoidance of that hurt and then
That's
also
the
just
stuff.
being hurt.
That's the stuff of description. But you also see how remarkably creative it is, how remarkably artistic it is, and how it moves. It's brilliant. So you see that somehow the pursuit of a broken heart was inherently in the thing. And they say, well, what was the issue again? I couldn't get anyone to cop to what the issue was. He said this or he did that. Or the red chairs or something. It had to have a reason. But let's say, and I can't say it's a fault, but when it happens, it then tends to dominate this, the structure around it. So I say it's brilliant. The theater of living is brilliant. But when it comes then from a perceptive sense and you re-enter the story, then the continuity is no longer a force that's that strong. Now it has to have what you call love in it, and that's to be discovered. It has to have somehow the soul of the story is your relationship, not so much the survival of the story. That's a byproduct of your relationship to the, and you see, and it's the mystery that runs through the story. That's your relationship. So when you are making agreements with another and it's a shared feeling, then you're making those arrangements that are creatively best for the circumstance. Because, and I say, why? Because now you're sharing should I say too much earlier? You're sharing almost a space that before she was born, and you were a woman, young woman. So now you're sharing a space where there is just a natural soulfulness. So you see when Kai's daughter sits on her lap and shows a drawing, that's what you have to bring about. Dopey is that. Can you do that, Ursha? Just do some drawings together? You'll work it out. Because again, it is pretty much for you. When I say soulful, it's soulful for me is I'm in a room alone in Boulder. And I'm looking out
Very
the window. So soulful means like I'm somehow disembodied from the structure. And so then I'm seeing it from a different place in the life. It's not to say that the other thing, if a landlord comes or this, it's not to say that those elements aren't there in my brain, but in the moment, it's just soulful. I'm not so connected to the literal life as much as I'm connected to the what it means to be alive, just to be somehow looking at it without commitment to a gender, without committing to a country, without commitment to a country or religion, but to be human. And so once the human is there, it no longer is part of the scheme of survival. It sees that there's a creative dimension to life. So I would say if competition means deeper, but if competition means very strong different points of view, I feel I don't have yet, I think the point of view is yet to be discovered. It's secondary to the experience. What do you say? So I say that it does seem that it's missing, as well life is missing a heartfelt conversation. That supposedly is there in the future, only in dying. That the heartfelt conversation means dying, the literal dying to the form. What do you think?
Seems honesty and true, or an honest conversation is more what's true rather than truth. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. More what's true is that the relationships, all of them throughout time, were love affairs of different sorts. And so you have access to the story from a different viewpoint. You are on the story. You see the journey, and some of that perception allows you to introduce it into where you are just normally. And that somehow your presence is inviting something to be seen. I say your meetings with Elliot, yourself, Joan, is around waking up, neutral, not treatment. But if it's still around treatment, then I say, then I'll catch you later.
You know, I never felt it was around treatment. I think maybe Elliot, you know, framed it that way from his perspective, but it was never that way. It was always just conversations, hanging out with Elliot, and that. So, I think that honest conversation is very viable in that situation.
Well, then that one that you want an honest conversation with has to know that that's what you're doing. They share that with you. So then I say, then you can ask, what is the relationship and what has been happening since it's not literalized in that way? Where are you? You know, what is happening? So you saw not too long ago, the person was talking about dying. and was not into it any longer, and then was pissed off that Will Wright would come back to visit him. He was, I'll never see him again or something screwy. So you see that Elliot has challenges that are happening. Now, it may be the challenge that will say that kidding around with Ursha, if your neck is hurting in the nighttime or you can't sleep, you're having challenges of aloneness. But your body and your brain and your being is having a conversation with dying and living. You're having a conversation with a pain in the neck or a pain in the back to take something for the night or something like that. There is a negotiation going on. You have a relationship to the negotiation as a pain in the knee or a pain in the neck or trying to have a civilized moment or a civilized. But you are also something profound. You are managing. So even though you're taking this, or you might try that, or you're doing this, it's remarkable the management that you're doing. You're buying time, you're buying space. And you've even created a medium to have an honest conversation. And again, the honest conversation is more an immersion where there's a shared moment. Then that moment makes a plan. Erja, do you understand that that moment then, out of a circumstance when it's shared, and they say, what's best? What room would you like to use of this? Okay, maybe we'll use that. There's available. So then it creates a creative grid, not an avoidance grid. There is somehow still a being there for an honest moment. And I know it sounds like a literal thing that one has to do, but I said it's in one's being in some way. When I mentioned to you about Elliot and the garbage on his couch, or it's kidding around sort of circumstance, but it also meant a kind of attitude.
Yeah.
When I was called in to care for something. But then I also say that I do care for that. There is a feeling that runs through the story, but there is also good luck, man. Should I fade? What do you think? Is it necessary any longer, this interaction or connection or whatever? What do you feel, Kai?
What?
Shall we carry on with this expression? Is it okay? Or is it used up its expression or form?
Here? It doesn't feel like that to me.
No.
Yeah. What do you say, Derek?
I find these conversations really important for me, just feeling wise. So I value them. I would prefer them to continue, as long as you'd like.
And as long as they're relevant with each other, then that's cool or whatever. What do you think, Urja?
Oh, I was just from the beginning today, I felt like I was in a space. It was so, how can I explain it? Yummy. Well, it was, I felt the depths of what's going on. And I want more of it.
Well, I feel that each of us here that have been sharing are no longer psychologically as needy in that sense, that it is basically an awareness that the life is not only around survival and making money and keeping it together that way. Those are more the caretaker of some energy or feeling. And then as you become aware of that thread that runs through the life and then runs through relationship, there is an element of, you see that it's a creative expression. And I feel that what we've shared was actually the actualization of seeing living and dying as a happening in the moment. Just like breathing in and out were happening, or male and female are happening, or the agreement in the body, the juggling act of the the systems are remarkable. You start to see the creative process going through the life. And in being exposed to that and seeing it, something genuine happens. The life shifts then from survival, where survival is only an aspect of the life, not a dominant force. And you see that there's a creative dimension to the life. And that would look like accidents or non-planning, or in fact, that one had to be in a naive state to have the experience because the thought, the knowledge of it owns it.
Yeah.
So that somehow in retrospect, looking back, you see the power of accidents or what look like accidents. You see the remarkable grid of one's life and that it eludes predictability in that sense. Because of the creative process, once you are aware of the creative process looking back, it enters into your perception. And so therefore, it's not some acquired state, but it is something that you bring to the story. So that's what I meant. I feel that there is also a yearning in those you'll meet, and that you're bringing, your presence is bringing an honest conversation to the story. And the honest conversation is about, you see that all the attempts throughout the years, at the same time, one was seeking, one was avoiding.
Yeah.
And you see at the same time that one was seeming a dharmic creative life, one was also living a karmic life simultaneously.
Yeah.
What does that mean, the karmic life? It protects you from the knowledge of death. And it protects you from the knowledge of dying, so that makes dying literal. But when something shifts, you see that dying and living are normally happening. And that there's a conversation that seems deeply spiritual because it's hidden from you. But that when you perceive the conversation that is happening in the life, where living and dying is happening, not as some threat or a hurt or something, but as a normalcy. You see the creative process of life. And somehow you freed yourself from the threat of death in the world that is a major threat to you, that you're going to die if you don't have enough food, if you don't have a job, if this, so, okay. So then it relieves you that they no longer own the concept of death as a threat. And you see something sacred that's hidden in plain sight. That you are not only you, this literally you that is surviving, but you become aware of a creative act as a large part of your life. And that creative act becomes somewhat sacred, not because of all the stuff that they throw out in the world, but because of your perception of it. Touches something in you. And so I think that you're bringing that energy to the story, even though you're still a person in the world, you're bringing that energy to the story. So then I don't know that it's coincidental or accidental or this or that. It has the element of a creative act. And I'm saying to you, if it perceived that, but if it wants to engage me in a competitive, I don't know that, well, okay, whatever name you like to give it, but I'll catch you later. It's kind of lame. And I say, why? Because they're heavy duty. What you're doing is heavy duty. Reed's no slouch and Elliot's no slouch. You understand? So I'm allowing something to unfold for me that may add another dimension to a larger story. So if there is, in fact, seems to be a desire to explore, then that's cool with me and we'll try it. How does that seem to you then?
Sounds good.
I'm glad I articulated to some degree. What do you think? Are you now telling me that all of you are doing crypto together?
I actually bought my first NFT the other day. you know, away from the specific finance, cryptocurrency sort of scam structure into NFTs, which could also potentially be a scam. But the artwork
If
seems.
you read today's New York Times or yesterday's, you'll see that they are talking about that. That some of the game guys just the game players were complaining that these guys were just in it for profit. They like the crypto, but they wanted the crypto to explore a new world, no longer taking advantage of people and selling them stuff or hustling them that way. So they said they didn't like these guys then coming into especially in the games, because these billionaires were coming into the game playing by buying games for like $65 million or something like that and making it their own. So then there has been a complaint filed and they withdrew. The companies then withdrew because of the complaint that they were nickel and diming you to death. They were selling you T-shirts that they said they were just in it to make profit, when in fact the game player thought that they had their own world that had purity to it, that you were exploring it, not owned by corporate structures and stuff.
Right.
So we'll see how it unfolds. It's a strange world. Have you explored it at all, Urja?
No.
Nothing.
Bitcoin? No.
Yeah, nothing at all.
No. It's something very abstract for me.
Is there anyone else still on there, Kai? Oh, hi. Okay, is there
Yes,
anyone else?
there are 5 people watching. I don't know who it is, but Jimmy, Sophia, Carrie, John have all been on.
Okay. Hello.
You had your
I
hair
hope it-
cut.
She just washed it.
I
She
thought
looks
it was
good.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good to wash your hair sometimes.
Look at this book of drawings. It's exercises. Nah, she doesn't like them too much.
I'm thinking she doesn't feel good, and that's why she's sitting on my lap.
Oh, really?
I guess.
Okay. Okay, should we call it a day?
She goes watching.
But
Hold on.
What'd she say?
She's complaining about her brother. I don't know, something.
Okay. Take it
Thank
easy.
you, Danny.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Danny.
See everyone. Hope
Good
to
to see
see you tomorrow night then.
Yes.
Bye-bye
See you.
then.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Danny. Bye, everybody.
See you
Bye.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.